Welcome to JasonWhiskyWise. My name is Jason. Welcome to this whiskey review where today, here on the channel, we're continuing our series into the Lakes Distillery, and we're going to be looking at the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.3. So here we have the sample of Lakes Whiskymakers No.3, and this one actually got sent in 2020, so last year. I think this was in June where I got sent this one when it was just released onto the market. So this is the third release in the Whiskymakers Reserve, and if some of you are going to ask me, Jason, where is the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.2? Sadly, I never got a sample of that one because that was actually on show at the Whiskey show in 2019. So I wasn't able to get a sample of that one because it was available at the show. So fingers crossed at some point I'll get a sample, cover it here on the channel so we have a nice whole playlist of all these Lakes Whiskymakers Reserves. So in terms of Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.3, I'll jump straight back to this one. If you don't know about the series, I explain it actually in my first video of the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.1. I'm actually going to leave a playlist over there in the top corner. But it's a series where the Lakes Distillery are trying to explore through the use of different casks and also the art of blending to define a house style for the Lakes Distillery, because it's still a new distillery and it's an English whiskey as well, so it's quite exciting. So in terms of the actual age on this whiskey, it is a no-age statement. In terms of the ABV, it's bottled at 54%. Yep, definitely 54%. In terms of the cask maturation, this one, it's matured in a combination of PX, Oloroso, cream sherry, which I was really excited for, and red wine cask. So we've got a combination of 4 casks that make the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.3. Now, in terms of the distillery itself, it is the Lakes Distillery, and they're located in the Lake District here in England, so a little bit north for me. At some point we will take you along with me and we'll visit the Lakes Distillery and show you exactly what the Lakes Distillery is. And if you guys want to visit as well, let me know as well in the comment section. Actually, that'll be a question of the day for this video. Let me know if you tried any of the whiskies from the Lakes Distillery, and let me know what's your favorite down below in the comment section. It can even be the blended series called The One, which is their blended series, which we'll get to straight after covering the single malts. Now, getting back to my review style structure, in terms of the actual price point, on a full-size bottle of this, here in the UK, on release, it was £65. It can differ £5, give or take, up or down, depending on retailer, but that's its price when it was released. And in terms of exclusivity, yes, this one is exclusive. It's limited to 9,200 bottles, what I read on the website, so fingers crossed I got that one right. If I haven't, I will quote it here somewhere on the video. And so yeah, it is a very limited whiskey. Again, 9,000 bottles. Some will still be in circulation, some will probably still be sold on websites, you know, retailers, etc. Maybe on the Lakes website itself. So without further ado, let's dive straight into what the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.3 has in store for us into the nose. So to start us out on the nose for this whiskey, first things up, this is a much more mellow whiskey than the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.1. For me, this is gentle, it's more approachable. And there's a lot of those red fruits, red berries going on the nose of this one. I think it seems to be at the moment a sort of a house style that I'm noticing on the Lakes whiskies, where you're getting these red fruits, red berries. For me, it reminds me if you open a pack of raisins, or even a bag of raisins, if you open it up, the sweet aroma from those raisins it just flies up into your nose. That sort of character of sweet raisins, red plums, and it's even got this sweeter aspect for me that reminds me of these strawberry and cream hard-boiled sweets that you can actually get here in the stores. It just reminds me of that. It's got that sweet fruitiness of the strawberry, but in a sweeter, almost like a sweet way, not an actual fruity way, and that little bit of a creamy, but wrapped around with a bit of sweetness. Behind that, though, I'm getting a lot of these cranberries, cherries. Actually, in terms of cherries, it's more like a maraschino cherry. I'm also even getting apple, but for me this is a red apple, a really dark, rich American red apple. Because sometimes when you go to the supermarket, you've got different varieties of apples. And this is one thing I wanted to mention actually in one of my videos when I talk about tasting notes, developing a palate. When you go to the shops or supermarkets, they'll have different types of apples. What I highly suggest, buy different ones and you can see the different characteristics of each apple brings to your palate. For me, this is like that dark red American red apple, really rich and fruity, but laced with a sweeter layer of an aromatic Mayuka honey. And there's even a sense of a little bit of that polished oak, where you polished a table, a bit of that, almost like the varnish, but at the same time a little bit of that oaky character on the end. Beautiful nose on this one. let's get into the palate next. Slanger. So my impressions from the first sip for the Whiskymakers Reserve No.3. First things up, texture-wise, this is a nice medium full texture. It's actually very similar in texture to the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.1. They've got a nice balance to the texture, which is really enjoyable because you don't want it to be too light, like some whiskeys I've tried in the past, a bit too light. This has got a bit more of its own depth to it. But first things up, you are getting that spicy character. For me, it's more towards sweet cloves and powdered cinnamon, where you're getting more of a sweeter spice. And that straight away then goes and dives deep into, for me, it's like a sticky toffee date pudding, caramelized figs, a juicy succulent fruitcake mix, and actually even the fruitcake itself, it could be made, and you're taking a bite out of that and you're getting these bursts of these different dried fruits, but darker dried fruits. And from there it evolves ever so slightly into like a dark chocolate or cocoa powder. Sorry, I was remembering another word for it, but cocoa powder. But dark chocolate cocoa powder, really rich as that dries the center of the palate, but still these juiciness from those fruits are sitting in the sides of your jawline, which makes you actually want to go back. And I'm actually going to go back for another sip, and we'll give our notes on the conclusion of this whiskey. So overall now, as we conclude the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.3, for me the finish in this one is nice and long. It holds itself on the sides of the palate, through the center of the palate, and that juicy aspect just keeps making you want to dive back into the glass, but you can still feel the characters holding on to the end of your palate. For me, this has got a lot of those stewed dark fruits. I even get a little bit of like a walnut character, a bit of a dark nutty but oily walnutty character, accompanied by this leathery, almost dark chocolatey note that follows behind it. And it really just wraps itself in these juicy characters just keep coming back, and I just want to dive back into the glass. But I know I've got a little bit of the sample, which I'd like to save for when I get Whiskymakers Reserve No.2, because that way I can then give you guys all a complete comparison between all four, and then maybe even a future release, maybe No.5 down the line. So in terms of my overall opinion on this one, I'm going to give it the score straight away. For me, this is getting an 89 out of 100. For me, this was a much, much better whiskey than the Whiskymakers Reserve No.1. But you've got to also understand that the No.1 is their first release, and this is the third one in the line. So the whiskey maker himself, Darvel Gandhi, has been exploring, and I think the cask selection of this one's just beautiful. For me though, nose for me, I give this, three ticks straight off the bat. It's beautiful. It hits every sort of characteristic you like in, well, what I like in a whiskey. It's mellow. It's not over the top. It's not in your face, and it's really well played, really well put together. For me, the palate similar, but the spicy aspect again, maybe a little bit up and down, but for me, palate is also really nice. The finish, again, really nice, and overall a very nice whiskey. This is something that I really enjoyed, and I'm actually looking forward to reviewing the fourth one, which we have over here, which is going to come up next. So for me, this is an 89 out of 100. This is a very nice whiskey. If you can find it and you like your sherry style, a bit of these red fruits coming through, this is a whiskey I think you should probably give a try, because it was something I definitely enjoyed. So it put a smile on my face. When a whiskey puts a smile on your face, you know that is gold in itself. So anyway, I'll wrap the video up at that. If you guys have enjoyed, remember, drop it a thumbs up. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, which I'll leave over there. And I'll also leave some other Lakes whiskey reviews up on screen. And I'll catch you all for the next video, where we feature the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve No.4. Slanger.